Lynn, we can get your product into 40 restaurants overnight. You can't build that alone. Gary Strand said it at the gate with a folder under his arm, and the practiced confidence of someone who has made this pitch before and expects it to land. He was smiling. The folder was thick, contract form, market summary, a 2-page overview of his distribution network's reach across 14 southeastern Michigan counties. Lynn Ha set her harvest crate down and looked at him. She said, "What does the per pound look like after your margin?" He opened the folder. He showed her the column. She read the number. She closed the folder. She said, "No, thank you." She picked up the crate and went back to the packing table. But what Gary Strand did not know, what he had never asked in 3 visits over 5 years, was that the roster already existed. 14 restaurant accounts, all direct, all signed, 3-year agreements, built one relationship at a time, starting with a farmer's market table in Ann Arbor in May of 2011. No distributor, no wholesale catalog, no margin reduction of 38%. Gary came back twice more before he saw it. Do you know the feeling when someone tells you what you're going to need before you've had the chance to show them what you already have? That is the particular patience required of people who are building something carefully while someone else is busy explaining why they can't. But before we get to the afternoon, Gary Strand drove away from the Ha farm with an unsigned contract. Let's go back to May 2011. And a market table, and a purple stem. Lynn Ha arrived in Michigan in 2004 with a cousin's address in Ann Arbor and $300 and the understanding, developed in the restaurant kitchens of Hugh, where she had worked from the age of 20. That food is a language with grammar and vocabulary, and that fluency in it opens doors that other fluencies cannot. She worked in restaurant kitchens in Ann Arbor for 6 years. Line cook, prep cook, the work that builds knowledge of how a professional kitchen actually runs, what a chef reaches for at the last moment, what varieties are never in the wholesale catalog, what a cook will drive to the farmer's market on a Tuesday morning to find. She saved for 6 years. In 2011, she took a microloan of $3,000, leased 3.8 acres of ground outside Ypsilanti from a landowner who wanted the plot managed rather than lying fallow, and started farming. She had 15 seed varieties to begin with, not purchased from a catalog, sourced from a seed preservation network her family had maintained in Hugh for 3 generations. The varieties that do not appear in American wholesale databases because they were never industrialized, never scaled, never adapted for machine harvest. Water spinach, the purple-stemmed variety her grandmother had grown along the irrigation channels in the Perfume River Basin. Perilla, 2 types, the green and the red-edged, the one for pho and the one for grilled dishes. Thai eggplant, the small round bitter kind, not the elongated variety. The wholesale catalog calls Thai eggplant bitter melon. Vietnamese coriander, which tastes like coriander, has been rewritten by a different hand, more complex, more persistent, less familiar. 12 others. She laid them out on the farmer's market table that first Saturday in May and stood behind them in a dark green apron and waited. At 9:15 a.m., a woman in a chef's jacket stopped at the table. The woman picked up a stem of water spinach, the purple-stemmed variety, not yet common in Michigan farmers' markets in 2011. She turned it in her hand. She looked at the color of the stem, which was the particular deep purple that comes from a variety grown slowly in deep soil with adequate moisture, not the washed out pink of a hothouse version. She said, "What is this?" Lynn said, "Raumung, water spinach. This variety, the stem is purple. It stays firmer in heat than the green type." The woman said, "How much?" Lynn said, $3 a pound. The woman bought 2 pounds. She came back the following Saturday for 4 pounds. The Saturday after that for 6. Her name was Mia Tran. She was head chef at a Vietnamese-American restaurant on Liberty Street in Ann Arbor. She was 33 in 2011 and had been running her kitchen for 2 years and had been looking since the day she took the position for a supplier who grew the varieties she needed for the dishes on her menu that required specific Vietnamese varieties rather than the American approximations her wholesale distributor carried. She had been coming to the farmer's market every week since she opened the restaurant. She had not found what she needed until she found Lynn's table. At the end of the 4th Saturday, she said, "Can I order directly? Not through the market. Direct delivery weekly." Lynn said, "What do you need?" Mia said, "What do you grow?" Lynn said, "Come to the farm." Mia came to the farm the following Tuesday. She walked the rows with Lynn for an hour, trying leaves and stems at different stages of growth, asking names in Vietnamese and English, noting the varieties she had been unable to source and the ones she had been using inferior substitutes for and the ones she had never seen outside Vietnam. At the end of the walk, she said, "I want a weekly order. I'll tell you the varieties and the quantities Monday. You deliver Wednesday." Lynn said, "I can do that." They shook hands. That handshake was the first entry in the Black Notebook. The Black Notebook was a standard composition book, college ruled, that Lynn had bought at the Ann Arbor office supply store the week she opened the farm. She had labeled the first section, Delivery Log, the second, Seed Inventory, the third, Customers. She wrote in it every week the orders, the deliveries, the seed notes from the season, the customer contacts, the conversations that told her what the chefs needed that she did not yet grow. Mia Tran's name was written on the first line of the customers section. Date, restaurant name, weekly order commitment, agreed delivery schedule. She added names to the list slowly. Not by advertising, not by selling. By the particular method that Mia had used, one chef at a time, at the farmer's market, in the conversation that started when someone picked up a variety they didn't recognize and asked what it was. In 2013, she added the second name, a Thai restaurant in Ypsilanti, whose head chef had come to the market with Mia and had spent 40 minutes at Lynn's table asking about the bitter melon and the Thai eggplant varieties. In 2014, 2 more, a new Vietnamese restaurant on Main Street and a Pan-Asian tasting menu place on Huron that the food critic at the Ann Arbor newspaper had recently profiled. Both had come to her through Mia. Both had called Lynn directly, not through the market. She did not have a website. She did not have a wholesale catalog. She had the notebook and the phone number Mia had given out 12 times. By the time Gary Strand arrived at her gate for the first time in the spring of 2017, she had 9 direct restaurant accounts. She had not told Gary this. He had not asked. He had shown her the contract and the per-pound column and the reach of his 14-county network and said she could not build a restaurant network alone. She had said no, thank you. He had come back 6 months later with an improved margin, still a 38% reduction from her direct sale rate, and said she would hit her ceiling without distribution infrastructure. He said the serious restaurant accounts needed volume guarantees she could not provide. She had asked which accounts. He had said the serious ones. She had gone inside after he left and opened the black notebook. She had counted the names. 9. Working toward 10. She had not hit the ceiling yet. If you have ever quietly built something that the people around you couldn't see because they weren't looking, you know exactly what the next 3 years of that farm felt like. Leave a comment. I want to hear about the thing you were building while someone was explaining why you couldn't. We'll be right back in the story. In 2018, Lynn added the 10th account, a ramen restaurant that had opened on 4th Street and whose owner, a Korean-American chef named James Yoon, had found Lynn through a conversation with Mia at a food event. James wanted Malabar spinach and Vietnamese coriander and the Thai eggplant for a specific dish on his summer menu. Lynn had the Malabar in the high tunnel. She had the coriander. She negotiated the Thai eggplant into the rotation for the following spring. She wrote James Yoon's name in the notebook. 10th name. In 2019, 2 more. A tapa-style restaurant whose chef had grown up in the Philippines and was looking for bitter melon varieties, consistent enough for menu printing, and a farm-to-table place on Carytown that had been following the food journalists' coverage of the Ann Arbor market growers. Both signed 3-year agreements. Both placed weekly orders. 12. In 2020, through the pandemic year, Lynn kept delivering. 2 of her accounts reduced orders. 2 increased them. The chefs were doing family meal boxes, comfort food delivery, and the specific Vietnamese herbs that Lynn grew were suddenly more requested than they had been when the restaurants were full. She did not raise her prices. She did not reduce her delivery schedule. She kept showing up. 13, in the fall of 2020, a new restaurant that had opened in October and whose head chef, a Yemeni-American woman who had been in the industry for 20 years, had called Lynn based on Mia Tran's recommendation. The call had been direct. Mia says you're the most reliable supplier she's worked with. I'm opening in the fall. Can we talk? They talked. 14. In the spring of 2022, a Japanese-Vietnamese fusion restaurant in Saline, whose owner had eaten at Mia's restaurant, and asked Mia directly, "Where do you get the water spinach?" Mia had given them Lynn's number. Lynn had met the owner at the farm, walked the rows, discussed the varieties. She had quoted her direct sale rate, the full rate, no distribution margin deducted. The owner had said, "That's higher than wholesale." Lynn had said, "My delivery arrives Wednesday morning. The freshness standard is 2 days from field to kitchen, or I credit the order." The owner had said, "How long have you been doing this?" Lynn had said, "Since 2012. The owner had signed. That was the 14th name. She had written it in the notebook on a Wednesday morning after the signing, while the spring planting was underway in the high tunnel, and her daughter, Bao, 19, who had grown up helping with deliveries and had been managing the delivery schedule since she turned 18, was loading the first Wednesday run. Bao had asked her, "Is this what you were building all along?" Lynn had said, "I was building it since the first name." Bao had said, "When do you add a 15th?" Lynn had said, "When I have the capacity." She printed the roster that afternoon. 14 names, 14 agreements. The date each had been signed. She folded it and put it in the pocket of the green apron. 3 weeks later, the farm's rhythm in 2011 was not the rhythm it became by 2016 or 2022. In 2011, it was the rhythm of a woman alone on 3.8 acres learning simultaneously two things: how to farm Michigan ground and how to farm it in a way that produced what she needed to produce. Michigan soil is not Vietnamese soil. This is not a complaint. Lynn did not experience it as a complaint, only as a fact that required adjustment. The Ypsilanti ground she leased was a silty loam above a clay pan, adequate drainage if managed, adequate fertility if amended. The kind of ground that rewards attention to organic matter in the surface layer and punishes the years you neglect it. She had read everything she could find about Michigan vegetable production before she started. She had also learned, in the restaurant kitchens, that the difference between a good ingredient and a poor one does not always appear in the textbook description. You have to grow it. You have to taste it at different stages. You have to know how this specific ground in this specific climate expresses each variety, because the expression is never identical to what the seed catalog describes. She had learned this the way she had learned everything in America. By doing it carefully and by keeping the notebook. The first season, 2011, was partial. She had started late in the year. The ground not leased until March. The planting not beginning until May. She got a half season and sold, almost entirely, at the farmer's market. The money was enough to justify continuing, not enough to call it a business, enough to call it a start. In 2012, she planted the full season, 15 varieties, 2 growing cycles on the quick maturing crops, 1 on the slower. She had the high tunnel frame in place by March, the plastic on by April, the transplants under lights in the farmhouse kitchen beginning in January. The first delivery to Mia Tran went out on a Wednesday in early June 2012. Water spinach, perilla, Vietnamese coriander, and 2 pounds of the bitter melon Mia had asked for after the farm walk. Lynn drove the delivery in her own car. It would be 2 more years before she had a van. She drove it in her own car every Wednesday for 2 years. The harvest bins stacked in the back seat. The herbs in damp cloth in a cooler. The cooler wedged against the passenger seat so it didn't slide in the turns. She pulled up to the back of Mia's restaurant and unloaded onto the receiving dock, and Mia or the sous chef came out to check the order. They always checked the order, not because they expected errors, because they wanted to see what she had brought. The varieties were always at peak, not close to peak, not nearly there. Picked at the specific moment Lynn had calibrated over 2 growing seasons to be the window between ready and past. The bitter melon was picked at the transition between pale green and the first suggestion of orange at the tip. The moment when the bitterness was complex rather than harsh. The perilla was cut before the seed heads formed, when the essential oils were highest in the stem. The water spinach was harvested in the early morning, before the heat, and delivered within 4 hours of cutting. Mia had said, at the 3rd delivery, "How do you know when to cut the perilla?" Lynn had said, "I cut it before it wants to go to seed. You can see it in the bud clusters at the top. When those start forming, you have 4 days before the oil drops. I cut at 2 days." Mia had looked at the bundle. She had said, My wholesale distributor can't tell me that. Lynn had said, they don't grow it, they move it. That distinction between the person who grows and the person who moves was the whole of the difference between what Gary Strand's distribution network offered and what Lynn's direct accounts received. Gary could move volume. He could not tell a chef when to cut the perilla. He could not promise that the bitter melon had been picked at the transition day, rather than 3 days later for convenience of the picking schedule. He could not grow the purple-stained water spinach at all, because it was not in his catalog, because it had never been in anyone's wholesale catalog, because it was a variety from a seed preservation network in Hu that did not exist in the American industrial seed system. He was a good distributor. He was not the right supplier for these 14 restaurants. Lynn understood this from the beginning. She had not declined Gary's contract from stubbornness or from the suspicion that distributors were bad. They were not bad. They were necessary for the operations they served. She had declined because the math was wrong and the fit was wrong, and she had already been building for 5 years before his first visit. The alternative that made his offer irrelevant. She had just not told him about it. There was no reason to tell him about it. He had not asked. He had come with a contract and a per-pound figure and a market summary, and the assumption that a 3.8-acre operation in Ypsilanti was going to need help from someone with a 14-county truck network. He was not wrong about small farms in general. He was wrong about this one. Lynn had not corrected him. She had said no thank you both times and gone back to the packing table. She was building toward 14, the same way she had built toward 5 and toward 9 and toward 12. One chef at a time, one Wednesday at a time. One season of reliable delivery after another until the relationship was so established that the chef mentioned her name to the next chef without being asked. She had learned this in the restaurant kitchens. The most reliable supplier is the one you don't worry about. The one who shows up when they say they will and delivers what they agreed to deliver, and calls you Monday morning if something is wrong with the crop before you find out Wednesday when the order arrives short. The supplier you don't have to manage. The supplier who manages themselves. She had been that supplier since the first delivery in June of 2012. She had been that supplier for 12 years. She had written every order, every delivery, every conversation about a new variety in the black notebook. She had the entire relationship with every chef on the roster, when it started, what they ordered first, what they had added over the seasons. The notes from the conversations that had led to a new planting decision, or a variety trial, or a change in the delivery schedule to accommodate a chef's menu change. Gary Strand had never asked to see the notebook. He had told her she would hit her ceiling without distribution infrastructure. He had not asked what she was already doing. The third visit was different from the first two in one way. The two chefs were there. They had arrived, as they always did on Wednesdays, at 9:15 and 9:20, respectively. Mia's sedan first, then the ramen restaurant owner's truck. Both of them had pickups on the roster. Both of them had been coming to the farm for Wednesday pickup for years. Mia since 2012, the ramen chef since 2018. Gary's first visit had been on a Thursday in April. The tulips were still in the farmhouse yard. Lynn's daughter had planted them 3 years before, The spring after she started middle school, and the high tunnel was full of transplants. The flats of seedlings in double rows under the grow lights, the air inside the tunnel, warm and green smelling in the way that only a high tunnel full of herbs and seedlings smells, which is one of the best smells there is if you have grown up around it. Gary had introduced himself at the gate, handed her his business card, and opened the pitch. Lynn had listened to the whole of it. She was not a person who interrupted. She had learned, in the restaurant kitchens, that you understand more if you let the person finish before you respond. She had listened to the reach of the network, the contract terms, the margin structure, and the market summary that Gary described as showing that specialty Asian vegetables had strong growth potential in the Southeast Michigan restaurant market. She had agreed that they did. She had then asked what the per-pound return looked like after his distribution margin. He had shown her the column in the contract. She had looked at it for a moment. She had said, "I net 18% less at that rate than I net on my current direct accounts." Gary had said, "Yes, but you access 40 restaurants instead of..." He had paused. "How many direct accounts do you have currently?" Lynn had said she would rather not discuss her customer list. He had assumed the number was small. He had said, instead of the smaller number you have now, the network reach offsets the margin difference. She had said, "The math doesn't work for me right now." He had said, "Take a look at the contract. Think about it." She had said no thank you and picked up her harvest crate. He had driven away thinking she would come around. Small farms always came around when the restaurant account base didn't grow fast enough, or when a chef changed and the relationship reset. He had seen it many times. The independent operators always hit their ceiling eventually. He gave it 6 months. 6 months later, he was back. She had a higher margin in the revised contract. He had worked on it, taken the number down to a 32% reduction from the direct rate rather than 38. He had also added a volume guarantee provision. If her crop fell short of an order, the network would source the substitute from another supplier so the restaurant account was not disrupted. He had presented this as the real value, not just market access, but supply insurance. She had said, "What variety of water spinach would you substitute?" He had said, "Whatever's available through the network." She had said, "The restaurant accounts that buy my water spinach buy it because of the variety. If you substitute a different variety, they may not accept it." He had said, "I'd work with them on that." She had said, "I would rather not create that risk." He had said, "Lynn, the serious restaurant accounts in this market are going to need volume guarantees at some point. You cannot provide that alone." She had said, "Which accounts?" He had said, "The serious ones." She had said, "I would like to know which accounts you're referring to specifically." He had said the Carytown Group, the Liberty Street Corridor, the New American Places downtown. 3 of those were on her roster. She had said, "I appreciate the revised terms. I'm going to pass." She had gone inside. She had opened the notebook. She had counted the names. 11 at that point. She had written in the margin, next to the date of Gary's second visit. Second visit. Same answer. She'd gone back to the transplants. She had thought briefly about whether Gary was right that the serious accounts needed volume guarantees she could not provide. She had looked at the notebook. She had looked at the section labeled Customers, where every account's ordering history was recorded in weekly columns. The longest column, Mia Tran's restaurant, went back 12 years. Not one missed delivery, not one order disrupted, not one week when the account had to find a substitute. The supply guarantee for the accounts that already knew her was not a contract provision. It was the track record in the notebook. She had gone back to the high tunnel. She had not thought about Gary Strand again until his letter arrived. The letter had come on a Tuesday in late March, 3 weeks before his third visit. It was on company letterhead, formal and polite, and it included a market research summary showing that small specialty farms typically plateau at 3 to 5 direct restaurant accounts without distribution infrastructure. The summary cited 3 industry reports. Lynn had read it carefully. She had opened the notebook. She had counted the names. Still 13. The 14th, the Japanese-Vietnamese fusion restaurant in Saline, had signed in the spring of 2022, 3 months before Gary's letter arrived. She had written the name in the notebook in April. She had gotten Gary's letter in the last week of March. The 14th name was already in the notebook. Gary's letter had arrived 3 weeks after the 14th name. She had read the letter again. She had looked at the notebook. She had printed the roster the following afternoon. Gary had arrived at 9 o'clock, 15 minutes before the Wednesday pickups began, with his third contract form and a speech he had rehearsed. He had not noticed the 2 cars parking behind him. He had been 15 minutes into his pitch. The network reach, the supply guarantees, the dozen restaurants he knew, when Lynn turned slightly and the 2 chefs stepped forward. Gary had seen them. He had recognized Mia Tran. He knew her restaurant. He did not supply it. He had approached it twice over the years about distribution, and the head chef, that would be Mia, had told him she sourced direct and was not in the market for a distributor. He had not known she sourced from Lynn. He had not known the ramen restaurant sourced from Lynn either, though that restaurant had told him the same thing. Direct sourcing, no distributor, when he had approached it the year it opened. He looked at the roster. He read 14 names. He had approached 4 of them for distribution contracts over the years. All 4 had told him they sourced direct. He had not known they sourced from the same place. He stood at the gate holding the roster and understanding, for the first time, the shape of what he had been looking at for 5 years without seeing it. The small farm with no website and no wholesale catalog, and a woman in a green apron who had said no, thank you twice, and gone back to the packing table. He handed the roster back. He said, "You built this yourself." It was not a question. Lynn said, "Yes." Lynn's daughter Bao had been in the farmhouse the morning of Gary's third visit. She was 19 and had been managing the delivery schedule since she turned 18. A spreadsheet system Bao had built that tracked every account's weekly order and synced with the notebook's information. She could tell you on any Wednesday morning which account was getting which variety, in what quantity, and at what time. She was good at the logistics in a way that Lynn recognized and appreciated. Without fully sharing, Lynn's strength was in the growing and the relationships. Bao's was in the moving of information. They were complementary, and the farm ran better for both of them being in it. Bao had been at the farmhouse window when Gary pulled up. She had seen the contract folder under his arm. She had called to her mother. The distributor's back. Lynn had said, "I know." She had taken the printed roster from the drawer and put it in the apron pocket. Bao had watched from the window. She saw Gary start the pitch. She saw the two chefs' cars arrive behind him. She saw her mother turn and the two chefs step forward. She saw Gary read the roster. She had been 15 when Gary came the first time. She had been there for the second visit. She had been helping with deliveries since she was old enough to drive. She had watched her mother say no thank you, twice, with the composure of someone who does not need to explain herself because the work is the explanation. She had understood, at 15, that her mother was building something. She had not known at 15 what the shape of it was. She knew it now. She watched Gary hand the roster back and get in his truck. She watched the two chefs go to the packing table with her mother and begin loading the Wednesday orders. She went downstairs. She picked up a bundle of perilla and started wrapping it in damp cloth. Mia Tran looked at her and smiled. Bao said, "Akmeem, he didn't know." Mia said, "No?" Bao said, "He still doesn't know how you and Mom started." Mia said, "Does he need to?" Bao thought about that. She said, "I guess not." She wrapped the perilla and loaded Mia's order into the van. By 10:15, the packing shed was clear and the first deliveries were on the road. Lynn went back to the rows. Gary Strand arrived for his third visit. He said, "Lynn, I want to help you build something sustainable. I know a dozen restaurants that would take your product if you had the supply backing." He named two chefs he was proud to supply. Two names from his network, two restaurants he counted as his accounts. Both of them were on page 2 of the roster in Lynn's apron pocket. She did not say anything. She turned slightly. The two cars behind her, Mia Tran's sedan and another she recognized as belonging to the owner of the ramen restaurant on 4th Street, were visible. The two chefs had arrived for their Wednesday pickup while Gary was still in the middle of his pitch. Lynn held out the printed roster. Gary read the first name. He recognized it. He read the 4th name. He recognized that one too. He turned to the back page. He read all 14. His face did not collapse. He was not a man whose face did that. But it changed in the way of someone who is recalculating something they had been certain about. He said very quietly, "These are all direct?" Lynn said, "All direct. 5 years." Mia Tran and the ramen chef were standing behind Lynn now, both of them, with reusable crates, waiting for the Wednesday pickup to begin. Mia was looking at Gary with the expression of someone who knows exactly what is happening and does not need to add to it. Gary said, "How did you get 14 accounts without distribution?" Lynn said, "I showed up." Gary said, "That's it?" Lynn said, "I showed up every week for 5 years, and I grew what they needed, and I packed it the way we agreed, and I delivered it when I said I would." Gary looked at the roster again. He handed it back. He said, "I didn't know." Lynn said, "You didn't ask." She put the roster back in her apron pocket. She picked up Mia's crate first and packed it, the water spinach in the bottom, the perilla in a damp cloth, the Thai eggplant in a separate liner. She moved with the calm of someone doing a task she has done many hundreds of times, and the calm was not performance. It was just the way a person moves when the work is familiar. Gary stood at the gate for a moment. Then he got in his truck and drove away. He left with the contract form unsigned. He did not leave it behind. Mia watched him go. She said, "That was the distributor." Lynn said, "Third time." Mia said, "Did he think you had 3 accounts?" Lynn said, "I think he thought I had fewer." Mia picked up the water spinach bundle and held it in both hands. She said, "I've been buying from you for 12 years. Lynn said, "I know." Mia said, "You should put the notebook on the wall." Lynn said, "It's a working notebook. I need it." Mia laughed. She helped pack the order. She did this every few weeks, not every Wednesday, but sometimes, on the mornings when the pickups were heavy, and there was a moment to stand at the packing table and work. She had never been asked to. She came because the farm was a place she liked to be, and because the work was satisfying, and because Lynn never made it complicated. That was the other thing Gary Strand had not measured. Not the 14 accounts. Not the 5 years of relationship work. Not the per-pound rate that was 40% above what his distribution contract offered. He had not measured the quality of the relationships themselves. The fact that Mia Tran had been to the farm a dozen times. That the ramen chef texted Lynn when a menu changed to ask if a new variety was in season. That the Saline restaurant owner had brought her family to the farm on an open farm day in September to see where the food came from. You cannot distribute that. You can only build it. Mia Tran framed a copy of the roster the following month and hung it on the back of house wall. The wall beside the walk-in cooler, where the kitchen staff could see it on every pass. She had printed it at the restaurant on plain paper and put it in a simple black frame. Her sous chef asked what it was. She said, 14 restaurants, all direct, 5 years. She pointed to the first line on the roster. That's us, we're first. The sous chef read the list. He said, she supplies all of these herself? Mia said, every Wednesday. He said, how? Mia said, she shows up. He looked at the frame for a moment. He said, that's it? Mia said, that's it. She went back to the line. The roster stayed on the wall. The food journalist's story came 2 months after Gary's 3rd visit. She had come to the farm in June, spent a morning, photographed the high tunnel and the packing operation and the black notebook. Open, on the packing table, the customer page visible, 40 names in Lynn's handwriting. The article ran in a regional food magazine in July. The headline was, 14 restaurants, no distributor, 5 years. Bao cut it out and framed it and put it on the packing shed wall. Lynn did not ask her to take it down. Gary Strand read the article. He did not call. That fall, 2 new chefs contacted Lynn directly. One had seen the article. One had been referred by me. Both wanted supply agreements for the following year. Lynn told both of them she was at capacity for the current season and that they could talk in August about the following year. She wrote both their names in the notebook, not in the customers section. In a new section she labeled, waiting. It was the first entry in that section. It would not be the last. She closed the notebook and put it in the apron pocket. She went back to the rows. Here is the whole of this story, and it is a simple one. Lynn Ha did not build 14 restaurant accounts because she had a distribution network. She built them because she showed up every week, grew what the chefs needed, packed it the way they agreed, and delivered it when she said she would. She did this for 5 years before anyone wrote it down, and 2 years before Gary Strand arrived to tell her she couldn't sustain it without help. She was not building against Gary Strand. She was not building for the magazine article. She was building because Mia Tran had picked up a purple stem in May of 2011 and asked what it was. And that question deserved an answer that came back every Wednesday for 12 years. That is the whole of it. You know this kind of work. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind where the proof is in the notebook. And the notebook is a working document, not a presentation. The kind where someone arrives to explain what you cannot do. And the only response is to show them what you already did. The proof is not in the arguing. It is in the Wednesday morning, year after year, the right variety in the right crate, delivered at the agreed time. Tell me in the comments about the thing you built while someone was explaining why you couldn't. The roster that existed before anyone thought to look for it. The 14 names that answered the pitch without raising a voice. Share this story with someone who's doing the quiet work. Hit the like button for Mia Tran and the purple stem. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story in this series. And if you've come this far, you already know what kind of people these stories are about. The ones who show up, keep the notebook, and let the Wednesday morning speak for itself.